Put it on. Okay, morning all. Thanks for coming, even though your sleep patterns are probably as disrupted as anyone else's. Shane and I have been talking a lot about how to approach the coursework for those who are less confident and going all the way across to those who are much, much more confident. And I'm going to hand over to Shane in a minute. But basically, the way to think about it is from this point onwards, you can start working on you should start working directly on your coursework. It's not ideal. In my ideal scenario, all the hours I spent preparing the material was in the kind of fantasy in my head that I could take you through it. It would build it all up in a systematic way. I think the lockdown has messed up all of that approach. So what we don't want to do is get caught up with artificial expectations and be a bit more realistic about making sure that you can tackle the coursework to a decent level. Shane will outline a whole bunch of different stuff. If you wanted to share your screen, Shane, I've got the coursework opening on the coursework because I think that's probably quite important. Right, so folks, I'm going to hand you over to Shane and I'll listen in as well.
Right, so let's start off by indeed sharing the coursework. So it struck me that the coursework was a little like normal coursework. And I think maybe we can view this in a slightly different way as a simulation of your real life when you finally graduate, leave, and start your own little software consultancy. So the story goes that you've been called in by a small company, which I've called Papple Limited, who have a successful product in the market, can you believe, based on the George Perec novel. So it's basically the example code that Nad gave you. So it presents a traditional command line interface to navigate an underlying decision map. So the decision map code represents, if you like, the legacy code base for this company's product. However, since they sold that or put that onto the market, the development team that produced the product have moved on and are no longer working for the company. So they would like you to take that code and develop a new product. Now that new product could be the existing decision map with its support software, but ported to Android with minimal behavioral changes. So it just works as it does on the command line, but with an Android interface. Or you could take that decision map, extend it, whatever that means, and apply a whole different user interface, or maybe an Android interface. They're two separate considerations. Or you could design your own decision map based application, utilizing the decision map backend software, potentially extended, or something completely different. So why do I say that's a simulation of a real situation? Because it kind of is. That often when you get called into non-technical or semi-technical companies, they know they want something. They don't know what it is. They'll recognize it when they see it, but they want you to make suggestions. But often they will have a basis for starting because they'll have got some other consultancy somewhere to have knocked them up a prototype that they've then shown shareholders or somebody or potential investors. So that is your mission, rather than this rather, what should we call it, abstract, let's call it that, abstract approach of saying, think of an application, think of it this way. So you've actually got something, you haven't got a blank sheet of paper, you've actually got this legacy code base. And how do we go about producing something from that? They've given you NADS decision map, the actual map, they've given you the code base, and they've given you these loose guidelines for what they'd like. Also, I mean, one of the reasons I'm kind of pushing you towards Android, but I'm not really pushing you towards it, is that NADS produced a whole load of videos to give you an introduction to using that. But that doesn't preclude you from using any of the UI frameworks like Flutter, etc., or indeed Swing. But what we're looking for, and what a company would be looking for, is they want something usable, saleable. They want where your money would come from the company, and where your marks would come from us, is evidence of improvement, of improved customer value. So in other words, for me, the reason you might change software ever is whether you're adding a feature, fixing a bug, maybe improving design, and maybe resource optimization. So there's kind of 4 reasons for doing it. But if you think of what are you doing there, fixing a bug, you're modifying the behavior of the software, because the software doesn't behave in the way the original designer intended it. If you're adding a feature, you're changing the behavior, but what you're doing is you're adding behavior to your code. So you want to retain the current behavior. For if you're improving the design, and we can talk about that in a minute, again, the idea is you retain the current behavior of the software, because that by definition is what we want it to do. And optimization is probably something we don't really need to talk about, but again, what you'd be doing there was you would be modifying the code base in such a way that it retains the behavior. So we talk about invariants often in maybe software design. So if you think of behavior as being an invariant, you're not changing the behavior, you're changing some aspect of the code. In the case of an optimization exercise, you're changing it to consume less disk space, or consume less RAM space, or maybe work 10 times faster or something. But again, this idea of having invariant behavior is all important. Now then, that sounds easy, doesn't it? But this is where the difficulty comes in, is how will you know if you make a change? So this is what happens in real life, right? Is you go into a company, say, and they've got an 8-year-old product with 5 million lines of source code, and no obvious documentation, and nobody really understands it. And there's a collection of bugs, and yeah, can you fix them for us? Your chances of learning that code are 0, really, in the time period you may have. So in order to say fix a bug, what you need to do is be able to reproduce it. That might be difficult. So in order to reproduce it locally, you might design a bunch of tests so that you can show the behavior, behavior of the code is currently this, demonstrating the bug. You could then understand the nature of that bug, and you can propose a fix it, and show that you fix the bugs. So that's it, you're done, aren't you? Well, actually, you're not done, because all you've done is you've demonstrated that those changes you made have modified the new behavior of the code in a particular way. But you also need to establish that the previous good behavior, everything else that the code base does, is still intact. So what you actually need is a collection of other tests to ensure that any peripheral aspects of the area of code you've changed remain untouched, because you may have had to change them in order to affect your fix, but everything now behaves as you expect. So what am I on about? I guess what I'm really on about is, if we were to look at, say, the decision map code. Okay, so let's fire up that. For instance, that one. Okay, so I'm just looking at it with Notepad++ to just open it. So here we can see, for instance, one thing that strikes me immediately is if we wanted to test this decision map code one way or another, we might want to supply it, because this CSV file is one massive great file, isn't it? And it's all a bit complicated. So it might be nice to have a very simplistic map that we can just check out and make sure everything works fine for it. But we're stuck because it's got to be source.data.csv. Now what we could do is we could edit data.csv, or we could have multiple copies that we just post in. But what we're seeing here is we're seeing a dependency. In order to make a decision map, any decision map we make will always use as its input file this source data.csv. So if we wanted to test decision map, say we wanted to know what happens when it gets an empty file, what happens when it gets a file that is illogical or in the wrong format or something, how does it deal with it? At the minute, we don't know. We kind of know that it works for this exact file. Yeah, because the proof of the pudding is in the eating. You know, we can demonstrate this code working. But because we're going to be extending and potentially supplying our own file, we want to think, can we think of different ways that we could maybe introduce this file into this class so that we can try different variants of it. Now that's a job for the user, for you chaps. If we wanted to talk about this in terms of kind of groovy, you know, industry jargon type thing, what we've got here is a dependency. We've got a dependency between this file, if you like, and this class that is an artificial dependency. So in order to allow us to test and exercise the class differently, we need to break that dependency somehow or control it. So perhaps you could overload this constructor by having a second constructor that, instead of just being a decision map, it takes as a parameter a scanner or a file name. It's up to you, however you would like to do it. So that way you can have multiple different files, and that would be a basis for testing this code, so that when you make modifications to the code, you can ensure that you haven't broken the existing excuse me, code base. So that's actually quite a useful technique. Why am I talking like this? Because obviously some of you chaps are really experienced, and you know, you don't want to base yourselves off this code base at all. Maybe I'd counsel against that. I would certainly, if you're less experienced, less confident, I would always suggest having a working build. So your first job, if you like, is to go away, pick up this source and build it, run it. For instance, here's me talking about how it works. Well, you might not have even realized how it worked, if you see what I mean. So in the IntelliJ, you can set yourself breakpoints so you can find out, oh, what happened? Why does it go here? Why does it go here? What's going on here? So you can step through it, you can learn it before you've made any changes at all. And then, for instance, as I say, for me, one of the obvious questions is, what happens when I've got a duff CSV file? How could I test that? How can I ensure that? Oh, why is this unordered map thing set to null in a comment? Oh, what's that about? I'm guessing that's not supposed to be there. We can see, for instance, in this build node thing, we build a new decision node, and we're making assumptions about the underlying structure of the string that comes in, or or both the string that comes in and the node. So what I'm saying is, if you constantly modify a working base, you've always got a working build of code. So why is that useful for you guys? It constrains the number of different ways you could have a horrible bug. Again, if we sort of think about what we talk about in industry, what you're taking here is an iterative approach, which is the basis of most of the various agile approaches to software development. Why is agile popular? Well, you're continuously, you've got the potential to continuously deploy this product. So in other words, you could get decision node. So you could have the parrot map, and you could start making changes. So for instance, let's talk about the kind of changes you might wish to make. If you come up with a map that is totally different, maybe you'd have a variable number of nodes. Well, what you're going to have to do in that case is you're going to have to make some modifications to this stuff, which might indeed involve modifications to the structure of this file. Are you going to break the old file? Will you not be able to run the parrot map anymore? That's a choice you might need to make. Let's say you've got started on that, and you're working on your magnum opus, so you're not expecting it to work until you've finished. So it's a rather old-fashioned way to work, almost like a waterfall kind of approach. So you're making a billion changes, and you're trusting that it's all going to come together just right. And then the customer shows up on your doorstep and says, "Hi, we were just passing by. Any chance we could see how the thing's working at the moment?" You wouldn't be able to do that. So by keeping a constantly working basis, you're reducing the risk that you can have this massive pile of jelly that you just can't pull together to work. and indeed you can continuously you could always demonstrate it working. Let's say it's not going to happen in this instance because we're stuck to the submission date, but let's say we, for some reason, for a laugh, Nad and I decided, hey, we're going to make you hand it in before Christmas now. If you've got embarked on this huge project of doing everything from scratch and making 1 billion changes to this code base, because there is a requirement that you still retain the minimal code base, you might not be able to pull it together in time. Whereas if you'd taken the what you might consider to be the plodding, slow way of working of continuously improving on the existing code base, you've always got something you can submit. I hesitate to say we are not going to ask you to submit early, but you would be able to manage that eventuality, wouldn't they? That's what customers like to do, or they might even say, hey, you've done enough there. A few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I was working for or doing some work for a mobile phone handset manufacturer, and they'd done a bunch of analysis that found it wasn't 80-20, it was even more than that. It was like 95% of the time, only 5% of the phone's features are ever used. And that shocked the men in suits who count the money, because of course they paid for 100% of something, and only 5% of it's important. So the mobile phone industry particularly has very sharp peaks and troughs of sales. If you miss the Christmas window, for instance, you could go bust, or you know, it's very important to meet dates, and often they'd be missing critical delivery dates because they hadn't finished the entire feature set they were working on. Whereas if you take this sort of agile approach of saying, okay, we've got this set of features, we don't know how many of the features we're going to deliver, but we know when we'll deliver it. That's if you like, that's the takeaway of what agile really is instead of, in the old days, we used to have a fixed set of features and we'd only deliver when we'd finished them. Whereas agile type approaches, and the kind of approach that I'm suggesting to you, has the benefit that you know when you're going to deliver because you've got a submission date, or indeed it's Christmas time and we've got to get this phone sold. And that submission date is the invariant, if you like, and you drop functionality according to whether you can deliver or not. So you have to then think in terms of the first few features you work on must be the most important ones. So I guess that's why I'm pushing this kind of approach at you, is it gets you into that mindset of you're never finished with a piece of code. If you keep polishing, you can keep polishing, but the customer only wants so much polish on it. I think that really encapsulates the basis of what I was trying to say to you. I don't know if I've been terribly clear. What I guess I'm saying is, for those of you who aren't terribly confident and are worried about the idea of this blank sheet of paper you've effectively been given to say, give us a decision map or give us this working application, you've actually got a starting point, and that starting point is this variable quality code, shall we call it, that does the job for the job in hand. So what you often find you need to do is, in order to modify the code base, this stuff, you may need to change the change the structure of the code. So for instance, if you want to change the underlying map, you might need a way of passing a different file into that, and that goes for different files or different file formats. I know some of you were talking about using, what was it, JSON or XML, or you could invent your own file format, right? No matter, whatever. If you want to retain this working model, the first thing you would do is say, right, I need this changed structure. So I'll change the structure. I will then convince myself that it still works. And once you know that it does still work, you can then extend the functionality. So you've got this constantly growing and sort of changing direction. I think it was a molding process. Now, to keep the analogy with the consultancy kind of thing going, you've got a collection of decisions you need to make. We need to see the decision map that you will be producing. It is just about acceptable for you to say, I'm not making any changes to the PEREC decision map. If you produce the PEREC, if you put a reasonable front end on it, so let's say using Swing or using Android, that's probably sufficient for a passing mark. So in other words, your PAPL Limited would be covering your invoice for a minimal number of hours. If you identify some bugs, say, which I'm certain exist in here, then part of your presentation might be, okay, I haven't really extended the functionality beyond the delivered functionality, the original functionality, but I've fixed XYZ bugs. There's probably a mark or two in that. Going beyond that, if you extend the functionality, so let's say, I've spoken to a few people about this now, thinking in terms of the potential structure of the decision map. So in other words, multiple nodes. There's lots of different ways you could do that. That would be something I'd expect you to talk about in your presentation. You're talking to the customer. Now it would be, again, for your customer, if you extended the decision map capabilities and yet retained the existing decision map, well, that would be a clever thing, wouldn't it? That would be a good thing. You don't have to do that. That's one of the decisions you need to make. And then I think you need to justify those decisions to us. So in the requirements for the coursework, there's a report, a 1,000-word report. What I want to see there is the primary decisions you've made and some justification for them. I think I also put something in about if you're wanting to do anything beyond the ordinary, you would need to consult the management. In other words, speak to Nad and I about your intentions. But you see, I think this way it allows the less confident coders amongst you to have a solid place to start. It allows the people who want to do crazy techie stuff, but aren't terribly interested in what the actual underlying decision map is, to not have to worry about that. So if you've been wandering around thinking, oh, I've got to think of a question and answers kind of thing, by all means use the PEREC one, but in much the same way as if you were presenting to a third-party customer. If you just give them back what they gave you, so in other words, if you just make a few changes to the CSV file, and put a minimal UI front end on it, your customer's going to be wise to you. And equally, we're kind of going to be wise to you that you probably haven't done a huge amount of work here. So I think what I'm getting at is it's quite easy to pass this, and it should be fairly straightforward to do a good job on it. But if you're at all unsure about the direction you want to take, come and talk to us. We can give you some guidance on approaches to take. But Nav gave you the first 6 steps on the coursework. I think I'd maybe add to that and say the most important thing you can all do right now is to pick up this code, build it, run it, and try to get your head around it, try to understand it a bit. What's missing from all of this code, which is always the case when you are given a mystery code base from a legacy company, is there's no tests. Yeah. If you, in theory, you could produce a test for every public function here. Okay, there's no public function, but you need a way of exercising this decision map thing, and for the other classes, if you add a set of tests that you can just run at the press of a button, it means you can keep making these gradual little modifications, keep testing, keep pressing the buttons, so that you never go far away from a working base. I guess I'm being a bit repetitive here, but there's a reason for that. It's a solid pattern, if you like, to keep changing, keep making something that works. Yeah. So I think I've hit the buffers now. I can't keep repeating it. I was toying with the idea of doing a demo, but I think if I do too much of a demo, I'll probably poison your minds by making you think, oh, we've got to do exactly what Shane was doing, and you don't at all. As I say, I think for me, what this approach has going for it is it's rather like the sort of thing you might encounter in real life. It encapsulates important ideas like continuous development, like agile work, like, for instance, what I was talking about there with the pulling the file out. You're breaking a dependency, because actually a lot of software reuse is about dependency management. So you want to be able to inject that dependency or control it in some way. These are all things that I think, well, I guarantee you will encounter in real life if you're out there writing or developing code. So you've all gone very quiet.
I'm still here. I'm hoping that people did. I did record everything, Shane.
Right.
And I will post that onto Moodle. But perhaps the sensible thing would be to open up any questions for anyone and see whether they want to. So can I just before we do that, can I just capture what I think is the summary statement is that the model that Shane is supplying is I think it was the one element I wish I'd put right in at the beginning, because it does frame it in a much more realistic way. The idea that the code I'm supplying you and the whole setup, if you now read the opening of the coursework, it properly frames it. So you can treat it like closer to a real world situation. And that's always a better experience. That it's legacy code, and that there are several ways that you could approach this coursework. If you're unsure, you need to unpick what Shane has said and come to I would encourage you to come to the drop-in and just ask for further clarification. But we have, or you rather all have, plenty of time to work out what your own level is. Can you link two CSV files together in Java? So why would you want to link two CSV files? What do you mean by linking two CSV files? I'll pass it back to you, Shane, if you want to. Abhirama, if you mean, can you extend a single CSV file and tack on other stuff? Yes, you can. Can you switch between CS files? Of course you can, because you just have different load mechanisms to load up that data. Linking two CSV files, you're thinking more like a database table by the sounds of it. And
so what I mean is something like, so my first CSV file will say, right, do you want something horror-based or do you want something not horror-based? And then have, like, for example, the horror-based thing. Have that one CSV file fully horror-based and the other one saying, right, not so horror-based.
Yeah, so essentially you've got, so you essentially using some kind of initial decision from the user to switch between which CSV file to run. Is that a way of capturing what
pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, of course you can. Absolutely. That's along the lines that Shane was saying. I mean,
exactly. That encapsulates nicely the first problem you'd encounter, if you like. Working from that, the code base you've got is the single CSV file is baked in to the decision map itself. Whereas what you want to do is I'm not telling you this is what you will need to do, but what you could do is before you even instantiate the decision map, the first question would be, do you want a horror-based one or not? And if it's horror-based, then it's horror.csv, and if it's not, it's comedy.csv. In order to do that, you need to modify the decision map to take something, whether it's a file name, whether it's a fully formed, opened file name with its scanner, whatever it is, you need to make that modification. So I guess the gist of the approach I'm suggesting to you is, first thing, make the modification to the existing file. So in other words, rather than having it baked into decision map, in the decision map test, it's called the thing that drives it, you make the decision map, you construct a decision map based on a file that it has no knowledge of, yeah? So then it will work for any CSV file. And then your decision about which CSV file you give it is external to the class. Are you with me?
Yeah, and can I just add a quick comment to that? The current decision map code runs the constructor for the decision map. And so what Shane is saying is that you need to think about that constructor. Is there something you need to do prior to specify the path? Matthew has asked a question in the chat, Shane, which is, he's made a statement or a question. Yeah. You could also do it in the same CSV file. And I think, yes, you could. You could put that initial decision of which subgroup of decisions you want to use. My instinct would be not to do it like that, because you've got two levels inside the CSV, and that may be better to manage separately. It's a subjective, partially subjective decision. I don't know what you think, Shane.
Yeah, well, again, so it's over to the designer. You have a choice to make, which you can justify or not. If I was the secondary customer, in other words, so if I was a user of the game, I'd say, well, hang on, what's all this extraneous crap in my CSV file doing? I'm not interested in that. Why have I paid for that?
Yes, I think Matthew literally,
got that. Yeah,
he typed it just as you said it, I think.
Yeah. But maybe working on this basis of small incremental changes to retain a working base, maybe your first approach might be, can I do it all in one CSV file? Yeah, brilliant. So that's passed my test now. Now I'll pull out that 50% redundant thing, put it into its own file. And, you know, that would be iteration number 2. All the while, before you even do these iterations, though, you need to know how will I know that my change has A, worked, and B, not wreaked havoc amongst the rest of the code base.
Absolutely. I just want to, can I just emphasize what Shane has just said about this idea of continuous development? For many of you, it might just seem like it's a fairly, you know, it's not something that you might appreciate the point of, but it is fundamental what he's saying, that as you make whatever change you make to that legacy code base, the code that we supply you, every iteration it should be functional. It's the thing that Shane and I were talking about, the tendency of undergraduate students to rewrite the whole code base and not test it in these incremental steps, and then suddenly it's over. You know, what he is giving you is a much more professional, commercially sensible approach to it. And I would encourage you to do it because it's also helpful to you. So you might think, yes, keep on testing the code, absolutely. Decide what change you're making and make sure that you have a way of verifying that hasn't broken your code. Yeah, absolutely. That's really sensible.
There's a pretty interesting book called something like, oh God, I think it's called something like Working Effectively with Legacy Code.
Okay.
By Michael Feathers, who's he's big mates with people like Robert Martin, if anybody reads any of the contemporary software book things. And I've probably pinched a lot of these ideas from there, I guess. You know, we're the product of our experiences after all, aren't we? Yeah, that's the fella. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there, but the gist of it is about effectively that a code base has structure and it has behavior. If you think to your UML, for instance, we were talking about this yesterday, haven't we? If you think to your UML diagrams, you've learned some UML, I think. They break into basically structural type diagrams like deployment diagrams, class diagrams, and packages and components and whatnot, and behavioral things like use cases, like sequence charts, like activity diagrams, etc. Oh, okay, is that an illegal PDF there? Okay, go to the library. But yeah, sorry, you broke my train of thought there. So the idea is, I guess, you don't want to, at the same time, modify the structure of a piece of code and its behavior. If you think about a coordinate axis, you know, it's better to go 1 unit to the left or 1 unit down rather than the square root of 2 units on a diagonal. Or, you know, let's say you change the structure and the behavior of a piece of code. You test it and it's broken. Well, what broke it? Was it your modification to the structure, which should have retained the behavior, or not? You know, so I guess that's what I'm advocating is a simple, straightforward method to do these refactorings, they call it. You know, so what's refactoring? Refactoring is changing the structure of a piece of code to improve its fundamental design. Now, that doesn't mean that actually that, say, the design of the code base you've got is poor, because we've just read in the description it's a successful product. But it was a successful product based on the solution to a particular problem, and that problem was to do the PEREC model and the PEREC model only and on a command line interface. So now we've changed its requirements to say, hey, we want to run it on a different framework, a different UI, and we might also want to extend it you know. So it's taking that continuously working approach.
I mean, and just to summarize, because we're coming near to the end, just to summarize this, if you are, say you have been, I don't know, drowning under all the stuff to do with the various modules and things, and you're thinking, how do I get my head around this? Think of it like this. Crudely, we supply you with legacy code. And basically what Shane has said, and we both talked about this, is that you can make minor modifications to it and submit that. So, but you've got to be conscious if you do that, you won't get points for changing the code base, because if you look at the grading criteria, there's additional changes you make that you can get more marks with. If you don't change the decision map, you clearly won't get anything for it. But we looked at the calculations and we think that even if you built a UI for the PERIC, there should be sufficient to be able to scrape through a pass on the module. I mean, I did check the numbers, but you might want to look. And if you're going to go down that path, please chat to us and I'll verify that to make sure that you know, the minimal level. Some of you may want to approach it like that, or your first iteration may be, you know, to do that. Procedural journey with procedural. Okay, all right. Yeah, I mean, and as you've said, Shane, I mean, we are trying to let the students who are at the more confident end, willing to really play with it, not go crazy. We don't want it to turn into an academic monster that you end up rewriting everything from the ground upwards and it doesn't work. So, you know, the continuous development model he's given you is, I think, absolutely the right one. Look, you have plenty of time to pace out and structure how you're going to do it. But think of it, the terms that Shane's given you, I think are probably the best terms to approach this.
Yeah, I mean, I realise to some of you, it might seem a bit trifling to do that, yeah? And that's because this is in reality, is a very small piece of code, rather straightforward. It's quite possible to keep it completely contained in your head, and you probably could go on a big bang kind of approach. That's not a scalable approach.
That's the point.
I did a bit of a survey of former students, new graduates I've had work for me in the last few years, people like that last year, to say, what did you find to be the biggest change in your experience between your undergraduate or, in fact, postgraduate degrees and practice? And to a large extent, it was about the order of the code base. It's impossible to get a million lines of code into your head. It can't be done. So you need an approach to manage that. So to the less experienced students, or the people who are just worried about having have had that experience already of having a lump of code and it's full of bugs and you don't know where to start, this is the place to start. And to the people who are a bit more confident, I'd say maybe use this as a way into working in this incremental way. I get it, right? When I was a student, I studied a rather more mathematical thing, so I studied physics, and I always saw it as a point of honor to have as few mathematical steps as possible, so that it was impossible to follow my working, because I thought that showed me out as a genius. I realized later it showed me out as being something other than a genius. Equally, I get the pride in having a really obscure line of code or a really super abstracted function. That isn't what we're looking for at the minute.
Absolutely. Any other questions, folks? Please come to the drop-in for further clarification. Time is on your side in some way. The model that Shane's now, I hope, and this will go, I'll put this onto Moodle, so those who aren't here, and I'll suggest they watch it for those the majority who weren't here. But the model, the strategy that he's talking about is one of the really valuable, you know, what we're trying to do, I suppose, is trying to get you to benefit from this, not just produce an assessment. I mean, we could just reduce everything just down to, you know, do this assessment, tick that box, but there's no real value from our point of view as educators to try to see you do it. And the advantage of Shane injecting that perspective in is that he's a professional software engineer, a practicing one. So there are lots of things that we as educators who don't practice as much, we miss the importance and the value of it. And I can only encourage you to take what he says really, really seriously as a method and an approach. Come back to us on the drop-ins to chat and get some more information, some more strategy, some more step-by-step. It's very, very sensible. I think, you know.
Yeah, if I could give you one message for your next step, certainly if you've not started yet, is build that example code, pepper it with a few breakpoints, understand that, and then maybe think, what tests can I invent? And you might need to change, well, you almost certainly will have to change the structure of the current code in order to allow you to test it. So that's passing in different CSV files that are broken, that are corner cases, you know, that kind of thing. So that's the one thing I would do, because I think what that will do for you is it will make you confident, because you'll have some running code. You know, that's what I like.
I'd agree with that. Well, thank you very much, Shane. Thank you all for coming and your patience, and I hope you did find that beneficial. Any last minute questions before you all have to dash off? Anything else? We should do the course of Java language, or is it okay Python? No, Rani, the backend has to be in Java. I mean, that's the one constraint for this particular module. You're also going to find it easier to put the backend in Java and front end with a whole variety of different platforms. It's also much more in demand, that relationship. Python seems to me highly in demand in the industry around machine learning code, not UI stuff. It tends not to be there, does it, for UI? So you might find a backend in Python and a front end UI. I don't know. I mean, I haven't put the word Java, I don't think, into the coursework. If someone wants to express, I don't know what your view is, Shane, but if someone wants to put a backend Python and front end UI and wants to go down that path, that's a really big challenge, but you know, let's come and chat to us if you want to go that way. It's not very, very common, and the industry tends not to look at that relationship. Python is used for data science, machine learning, protocols, algorithms, etc.
Python's kind of taken over from Java a wee bit as everybody's second language.
Okay.
I think it's convenient, like Java was. That it's easy to knock up a network client to do some specific testing. That's how I see it used. Sure enough, it's used a fair bit in machine learning and AI. Actually, the heavy lifting is done behind the scenes by the you know, with a bit of manly C++ or something. So
we'll leave it open.
Should we? Don't do it, but don't do it because you're not confident with Java.
Yeah.
Because you all did Python last year, right?
Yes, they did. Yeah.
So if you do an ugly Python, that's much worse than doing you know, an ugly Java, actually, because you should already know Python.
But Ranim, if you're interested, come and speak to us in the drop-in.
Yeah.
And you know, if it's a valuable experience for you. Right, I think we're almost out of time. Thank you very much, Shane. I will post that.
Welcome.
And hopefully that will encourage more of you to pop in and ask relevant questions for your drop-in. We don't have to make it appointment based, but you know, one of us will tend to hang around for that period of a drop-in, so you can just appear for it and ask a question. Okay, folks, thank you all very much for your patience and time this morning. See you soon.
Cheers.
Don't worry, Conrad. That's actually a very funny misspelling of my name. Nadir means the bottom of the. It does. I don't take. Yeah, I know, and that's my most hilarious auto-correction to it as well. No, don't worry. I'm not that kind of sensitive. Oh my God, you've offended me. But calling me Nadir is quite funny. Has a lot of joke potential as well. Okay, so please, folks, any doubts, any questions, you know, as you disappear, come to the drop-in, and we'll do one-to-ones. We'll use breakout rooms and all that stuff to chat to you. Thank you very much for your time on that, Shane. I certainly have started to realize the shortcomings of this is the kind of stuff we need to be doing. And everything you said about legacy code, you know, you've made me really think that next year, the whole frame of it should be around what you've said. I mean, I may be exaggerating and you may say, no, that's getting carried away. But the idea that, you know, here's some legacy code. First 3 weeks, you have to do these number of exercises, build test cases, test it, make some, you know, et cetera, and you have to produce some evidence. Then we can start moving in and, you know, and approaching it slightly differently.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things I'd probably want to do, like actually having some automated testing. So the other side of making lots of incremental changes is you actually want to have some kind of configuration management behind you. So like so building out of Git or something.
Yeah. Because
of course, by its nature, you're going to have a number of blind alleys. So you're going to think, oh Christ, I didn't want that. I need to go back one. We haven't got time at this point to represent. Oh, good. Okay. We haven't got time to present some of those approaches. So I was kind of thinking, shall I get them to do it by hand, like developing their own unit tests by hand?
Right.
Because it's practical to do that in a tiny little project like this.
Yeah. Maybe what we could do is
at this hour, it's probably a bit complicated.
Yeah, I think because we're now sort of approach, but actually, I think this is something that we need to build in for next year. I think in particular, and restructure it along the lines that you said, making it much, much more. I like that. You know, his legacy code, the introduction to the coursework frames it in a way that I feel it's very satisfying, that frame. It feels to me that, as you say, it brings it back into a real world type setting. And I think we can reframe the teaching material and the approaches and get week by week material. Sorry for those who are hanging around. I'm just chatting about next year's stuff, so you don't have to be here for that. But I think from this point onwards, by encouraging that continuous development, and I think we stand a decent chance of students coming away with having.
Well, I think what it does is it addresses that scalability issue.
Yeah.
That you know, if all we're ever presented with is little couple of hundred line projects or bases, they come away thinking, oh well, software's easy. You just keep it all in your head.
Yes.
And you can do these sort of big bang kind of rewriting type of things. But if you go into a real environment where you haven't got the option to rewrite the, you know, Google's search or something, you know, so you need a scalable way of dealing with these large code bases, because all too often, I mean, the sort of rewrite, oh, we'll have to rewrite this, is a bit of a newbie's thing, you know, because really what it is I don't understand that. It was like the chappie asking about the Python. Now, that's because you're a bit scared of Java now. But actually, it shouldn't be, you know.
I agree. And interestingly, what you say feeds directly into the way that final year students do their projects. They do go for that big bang, a binge type of approach versus and I've noticed that just unconsciously, I've started to encourage them to break it into small iterations, achieve the problem by breaking the complexity down into something smaller, and then making sure that works, and then growing it in a kind of iterative practice.
Which, a bit like the example I was talking about there with the handset thing, that was a real thing.
Yeah.
You mean we've held off delivering, it was, so actually it was for a company, a massive company that made a reference system for all the other handset manufacturers. This is just before smartphones.
Right. Well, I've got to go. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
All right, no worries.
I've got to go. I've got a session student waiting. We'll carry this on tomorrow, 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're around. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. I'll stop the recording.
Not at all. Okay.
Cheers.
Later.